that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
A large, hairy creature with arms that hang down beside bore down on its sides.
Only heavens. And I told him my name, and when I told him his name, he said he was called Cold.
It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
You're listening to the Strangeology podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Foran, and this is your place to explore the weird, strange, and unexplained. From cryptids and creatures, the paranormal, aliens and UFOs, forbidden knowledge, ancient mysteries, conspiracies, and more. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Coming up on today's edition is this year's Strangeology Halloween special for 2024. This is going to be an epic one, and I want to get right into it. So I'll save any updates and additional information for the end of the show. Imagine holding something in your hands that carries a dark history. Something so deeply haunted by tragedy and misfortune that just being near this object or place makes your skin crawl. Today, I'm going to dive deep into some of the world's most cursed objects and places tainted by rage, grief, and potentially malevolent forces beyond our understanding. What if these curses on these objects aren't just the stuff of legend, but are the real deal? And just a warning for listeners ahead, these objects have been blamed for death, murder, madness, and personal ruin throughout history. So we're going to be covering a lot of these topics. From your regular everyday person all the way to royalty, these curses know no bounds. And just what gives these objects their power? Is it superstition and belief? Or is it something else, something more sinister that's at play? Are you ready to find out? Let's get into it. The first cursed object on the list is the Hope Diamond. Now, you've probably heard of this thing. It's perhaps one of the most, if not the most, famous and coveted jewels in the world. But what if I told you that it's left a trail of misery, death, and ruin in its wake for literal centuries? The Hope Diamond is a 45.5 carat diamond. It's deep blue in color, and it may look innocuous, but it is one of the most famously cursed objects in all of history. And the stories I'm about to go over that surround it might even make the most skeptical among us take pause. Now, the Hope Diamond's story begins in early 17th century India. Legend has it that this gemstone was originally part of a temple shrine in India. It likely originated in the Kolar mine in Golconda in the early 1600s. In 1630, Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, a French merchant and traveler, began a series of 6 voyages that he took between Paris, France, all the way to Persia and India, trading gemstones and other high-end wares. Sometime between the years of 1640 and 1667, Tavernier acquired this diamond, which was originally a 115 carat diamond, more than twice the size of what it is today. And it was said to be the size of an adult man's fist, one of the biggest diamonds in the world. Now, normally Tavernier would document from whom and where he acquired his items along his trade route, but for some reason he didn't list the information about this diamond in his logs other than it being called the Tavernier Blue. Now, it's theorized that because of this omission in his logbook, Tavernier may have actually stolen this diamond from a Hindu temple off of the statue of the goddess Sita, wife of Lord Rama, and was one of 2 matching stones used as the eyes on this idol. Now, it's said that the caretakers of this idol believed that it held divine power, and that to desecrate such an object was to invite divine wrath. And as the story goes, this wrath would follow anyone who dared to possess the gem from that moment on. Now, Tavernier returned to Paris in 1668, selling a bounty of large diamonds, including the Tavernier Blue, to King Louis XIV. and being in possession of this massive diamond didn't seem to have any negative effect on him, at least not for some time. In the following decades, Tavernier received patents of nobility and purchased a large estate in Geneva, where he spent several years chronicling his journeys east and collecting treasures. The last couple years of his life aren't as well documented, but it is known that he traveled to Russia in 1687 and died 2 years later at the age of 84. Now, it's believed by many that the diamond's curse finally caught up to him, and on one fateful day, the day that he died, Tavernier was attacked and torn apart by a pack of wild dogs while in Moscow. Others think that he simply died of old age, but we don't know for sure. Circling back to King Louis XIV, however, is the next step in this story. As it turns out, Louis commissioned a court jeweler to turn the Tavernier Blue diamond into a piece to be remembered. This resulted in the gemstone being cut in half and being turned into a 69-carat diamond, where it was renamed the Blue Diamond of the Crown, or the French Blue, and King Louis XIV would wear it on a ribbon around his neck. Following his possession of the diamond, all but one of King Louis's legitimate children died in childhood. In this era, that wasn't necessarily unheard of, and perhaps it's just coincidence, but some think that the diamond may have been enacting its wrath on the French royal family. King Louis XIV didn't escape the wrath of this diamond as well, and suffered many ailments throughout his life, such as gout, chronic dizziness, fainting spells, headaches, and he even seemed to have symptoms of diabetes. And King Louis wasn't the only one affected. There was another person who was allegedly impacted by this diamond. It was a man who worked for the king named Nicolas Fouquet, and was tasked with guarding the French crown jewels. And on one special occasion, he wore the French blue. Soon afterwards, he lost favor with Louis XIV and wound up getting banished from France, but then his sentencing changed to life in prison, where he spent 15 years locked in the fortress of Pignerol up in the Italian Alps until he died in 1680. Now, during King Louis XIV's reign, someone else was said to be cursed by the diamond as well. His primary mistress, Madame de Montespan, who was already married into French nobility. She attended the king's court often and established herself as the, quote, reigning beauty of the court, and soon won the favor of King Louis. And soon enough, their romance led to them having 7 illegitimate children together. However, their affair became very public, with many referring to her as the true queen of France. Madame de Montespan was also seen wearing the French blue and would be heard frequently talking ill and disrespecting of the actual Queen of France, Maria Theresa, publicly. Eventually, this landed her in trouble with the Catholic Church, where they accused her of using witchcraft and performing black masses to stay in favor of King Louis XIV above his other mistresses as well as the Queen. The pressure from the church then led to King Louis XIV placing her in a convent, where she eventually died in 1707, and her children were forbade from ever mourning her death. And then in 1715, after ruling France for over 72 years, and just days before his 77th birthday, King Louis XIV died of gangrene. And ultimately, along with the title of king and the king's estate, the diamond, a prized possession, wound up being inherited by his great-grandson, King Louis XV, when he assumed the throne that year at the age of 5. Although Philip II, the Duke of Orleans, presided over the Kingdom of France until Louis XV reached the age of 13. This is all very Game of Thrones. Now, Louis XV was initially liked by France and became known as Louis the Well-Beloved. However, he was a poor decision maker and a stubborn king, which earned him contempt by the French populace. These decisions lessened France's power in the world, losing colonial possessions in North America and India during the 7 Years' War between 1756 and 1763, which totally drained the French treasury. Louis XV then died in 1774, and his actions ultimately led to the situation that started the French Revolution in 1789, which is very interesting that there is potentially a connection between this allegedly cursed object and a massive major historical world event. And of course, Louis XVI became the next king, where he and Marie Antoinette inherited the French blue as well. And well, we all know what happened to them when they met the guillotine. Now, one of Marie Antoinette's friends, Marie-Thérèse Louise of Savoy, Princess of Lamballe, was said to have worn the diamond at one time as well and met a similarly gruesome fate at the end of a hammer and had her head wind up on a pike by revolutionaries. So were all of these fateful ends to historical figures just coincidence, or is this diamond truly cursed? Well, we're just getting started with the Trail of Dead, and the Hope Diamond's pattern of tragedy didn't just end with royalty. According to the history, the diamond disappeared for some time after the French Revolution and eventually wound up being stolen and turned up in the hands of a Dutch diamond cutter named Wilhelm Vals, who apparently recut the jewel to hide its true identity, reducing it down to 45 carats. Wilhelm's son, Hendrik, stole the jewel, and it was said that Wilhelm died from grief, believing that he was a ruined man, he had this fortune, and now it was gone. Although others believe that Hendrik actually killed his father, but as far as I could find, that claim seems to be unsubstantiated. Hendrik wound up giving this gemstone away and later took his own life in 1830. The man that the stone was given to was named Francis Beaulieu. Now, Beaulieu traveled from Marseille to London to sell the diamond to a jewel dealer named Daniel Eliasson. However, when Eliasson arrived at Beaulieu's lodging house, he found Beaulieu dead, having succumbed to a fever. And then the diamond's whereabouts was finally made public in 1812, again by a John Francilian in London, who announced that the stone was in the possession of Eliasson and that it was for sale. And wouldn't you have guessed it, shortly after this, Eliasson was found dead, having taken his own life. Afterwards, it's believed that the diamond wound up in the possession of British royalty in the hands of King George IV and was ultimately sold again in 1830 after his death due to George's massive debts that he left behind. The next piece of history starts in 1839 when the diamond appeared in the gem catalog of a Henry Philip Hope, which is where we get the current name from, the Hope Diamond. Now, this diamond was passed down through the Hope family for generations, and Henry wound up dying in 1839, the same year that it appeared in the gem catalog, and passed on to his nephew, Henry Thomas Hope, and then from there to his grandson, Lord Francis Hope, who had massive financial problems that nearly bankrupted him. He lived this life that was well beyond his means. So he would take family jewelry, sell it, heirlooms, art. He would borrow money, and he was just plummeting further and further into debt. Meanwhile, during a visit to America, his wife actually left him for this United States Army officer, and this happened in the year 1900 at the turn of the 20th century. And the following year, Lord Francis sold the Hope Diamond to pay off his debts, formally divorced his ex-wife, remarried a few years later, but then ultimately died poor and destitute in 1941. So it seems that the curse continues to happen, although it may not necessarily always lead to some kind of brutal and gruesome death, it could also leave people poor and destitute and having to go through all of these really tough life challenges. Now, Lord Francis's ex-spouse, May Yohei, also wore the diamond on a number of occasions while they were married. And it turns out she fell on similar misfortunes, divorcing and marrying several times throughout her life, and also ultimately winding up destitute, poor, and dying of poverty in 1938. And the story of the Hope Diamond just keeps going. Lord Francis, well, he sold it to a man named Adolf Vale in London, and it changed hands again to a diamond dealer in New York named Simon Frankel. After that, it changed hands a number of times between 1901 and 1908, and it's thought that a French banker named Jacques Collet bought the Hope Diamond from Frankel, only to go mad and basically check out of this reality. It was then sold to a Russian prince named Ivan Kanatowski, and his lover was this actress named Laurence Ledoux. And the first time that she wore it on stage during a performance, a man in the audience shot her. And just weeks later, the prince was stabbed to death by revolutionaries in Paris. Frankel's then acquired the Hope Diamond again, and then, probably fearing for his life, quickly sold it to a Greek jewel dealer named Simon Myancharides in 1908, who in turn, probably familiar with the story, sold it to a Turkish dealer named Habib Bey. And on the night that the deal was made, Myancharides final destinationed it and drove his carriage over a cliff, which killed him as well as his wife and their child. And you thought we were done? Well, no, we're not done yet. The body count keeps rising. You see, because Habib Bey sold the diamond to someone else named Salman Habib, who was acting on behalf of the last Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Abdul Hamid II. And just a few months before this transaction, Habib Bey drowned while on a French steamship that sunk. You can't make this up. Now, Sultan Abdul gave the stone to one of his favorite concubines, who wound up getting stabbed by a jewel thief. And there were a few other deaths involved during this period, but ultimately this sultan wound up getting overthrown during the Young Turks Rebellion in 1909 and was imprisoned in Istanbul until he died near the end of the First World War in 1918, where the Ottoman Empire ultimately collapsed and dissolved. Afterwards, the Hope Diamond found its way back to France, and it changed hands several more times, and then wound up in the hands of a woman named Evelyn Walsh McLean, who was an American mining heiress and socialite in 1911. And despite warnings of the diamond's dark history, she initially dismissed the curse as mere superstition. However, McLean soon experienced a string of devastating losses. Big surprise there. Shortly after acquiring the stone, her mother-in-law died. And then in 1919, her 9-year-old son was killed in a tragic accident after he ran out into the street in front of an oncoming car. In 1929, it turns out her husband left her for another woman. And then in 1946, her daughter, who was 25 at the time, died from a drug overdose. The following year, McLean herself died of pneumonia, and she was in poverty due to living a lavish lifestyle and overspending, having lost everything that she cherished in life. And the cursed blue stone, it sat as radiant as ever, seemingly indifferent to the destruction that it had wrought. Although the jewel was supposed to remain in the McLean family, permission was gained to sell the stone to pay off her debts posthumously, and ultimately it was donated to the Smithsonian in 1958. But the diamond had to claim one last victim. The postman who delivered the diamond to the Smithsonian crashed his truck, resulting in a shattered leg directly after dropping it off. And he was then involved in another car accident where he got a severe head injury. He also lost his wife and dog to untimely deaths as well. And to top it all off, a part of his home caught on fire and burned down out of nowhere after he had handled the Hope Diamond. And ever since sitting in the museum behind safety glass, its curse is said to gone dormant, but for how long? Now, while some might chalk up these events to mere bad luck, the sheer number of deaths and misfortune and disasters linked to the Hope Diamond is very much chilling and interesting. And while the stories of its previous owners' tragedies make for compelling tales, paranormal researchers often point to the diamond's unsettling energy. Those who have handled it, even briefly, report strange feelings of dread and unease, as though the stone itself has some kind of aliveness to it, almost like it's infused with some kind of malevolent energy beyond its glittering, beautiful exterior. Some museum workers at the Smithsonian apparently have reported odd occurrences near its display case, so maybe not all are safe from its curse today. Some have reported things like sudden drops in temperature, flickering lights, inexplicable heaviness within the air, and some visitors too have described similar things, feeling chills or strange senses of dread when they're near the Hope Diamond. Now, who knows, if it ever gets let loose, it could continue its wave of destruction on humanity. Now, the Hope Diamond has captivated the imaginations of people for over 350 years. There's been all these books, documentaries, movies, all about it, and it's also served as inspiration for stories of other cursed objects, or how it could be a symbol of beauty and wealth being intertwined with tragedy, and that wealth could ultimately lead to people's downfall. Kind of that trope, that idea. But in the end, the Hope Diamond is very much a cautionary tale for sure about treasure, wealth, money, riches, all of that. And who knows if it's actually real, but it is very interesting that it has a trail of so much death and misfortune surrounding it that perhaps there is something to this story. Now, the next cursed object on this list, in a world full of haunted and cursed objects, few have captured the imagination quite like the Dybbuk box. Now, the word Dybbuk, which you would think it's Dybbuk, but I looked it up, people pronounce it Dybbuk. This can be traced back to Jewish folklore, and its meaning is said to describe a malicious spirit that possesses the living. According to tradition, these entities are said to be restless souls, such as those who died under tragic or unjust circumstances. These souls then become Dybbuk, and in turn can cling on to or attach to people or objects where they will in turn cause pain, suffering, and misfortune. It's believed that these types of spirit possessions are harder to happen for virtuous people and are much easier and will happen more often with someone who is immoral, which makes them vulnerable to this type of possession. And the only way to banish a Dybbuk is by undergoing an exorcism performed by a rabbi. Some interesting history there. So the Dybbuk box first made headlines back in 2003 when this item was listed on eBay by a writer and antique furniture dealer named Kevin Mannis, who lived in Portland, Oregon at the time. Mannis had claimed that he initially acquired this box at a local yard sale, and the seller informed him that it came from her Polish grandfather, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, and was warned not to open the box due to it having some kind of evil energy attached to it. And this warning, of course, went unheeded. Now, when Manus opened the box, he found that there were 2 locks of hair, a small slab of granite stone, a dried rosebud, a goblet, 2 wheat pennies, 1 candlestick, and apparently 1 Dybbuk. Now, afterwards, Manus claimed that he began to experience strange and unsettling phenomena that was unfolding in his life. After purchasing the box, he brought it to his furniture store to refinish it and gift it to his mother. He left it in the shop portion of the store down in the basement and then went out to run errands, leaving his employee, a young woman, in charge of the store for the rest of the day. 30 minutes later, Manus receives a call on his cell phone from this employee who is panicked and hysterically screaming that someone was in the store breaking glass, swearing, and she couldn't see anyone there. Nobody had come into the store, and whoever this intruder was apparently had locked the iron security gates to get out of there, as well as the emergency exit, so his employee was trapped in the store. Manus then told her to call the police, but as soon as he did, his cell phone battery that was charged up suddenly went dead. He then sped back to the store to help his employee and find out what was going on, and when he got there, he said that he found that the gate was actually locked. He had the keys, so he managed to unlock it and finally got inside, where he found his employee on the floor in the corner of his office just sobbing hysterically. So he went downstairs to the shop to investigate and found that there was this overwhelming smell of cat urine, even though he kept no animals in the store. The lights in the shop didn't work either, and he found out the explanation for the sound of glass shattering. As it turns out, all of the light bulbs in the basement shop, I believe there were 8 of them, had all just exploded. And there was only one way in and out of there, and there would have had been no way for anyone to escape or hide without him noticing. So he went back upstairs to ask his employee more questions about what had been going on, but she had already left and quit immediately after that incident due to being so scared, one would assume. And the high strangeness didn't end there. Manus claimed that after a while of being in possession of this box, he started to experience being haunted by the nightmare of a gruesome old hag in his dreams, as well as being attacked by an unseen force at night. He described it as he would just get the crap beat out of him by whatever this entity was. And objects around his house would move on their own, the lights would flicker on and off, strange and unexplainable smells would permeate his home. Sometimes it would be like a combination of cat urine, like at the shop, as well as a mixture of jasmine flowers. Sounds terrible. Manus then took note that anytime someone spent any time near the box, they would become afflicted. Friends and family began to suffer from strange and inexplicable health issues. Manus said that his mother suffered from a stroke just days after coming into contact with this box that was supposed to be a gift for her. And while she recovered, she apparently later described seeing a strange shadow figure in her recovery room at the hospital. And so at this point, Manus decided to get rid of this box. Now, his eBay listing described the box as this antique wine cabinet. It was made of wood. Its dimensions were about 1.5 feet tall. It talked about it being from a Polish Holocaust survivor, and that the description went on to allege that this cabinet was haunted. It was inhabited by some demonic entity and was responsible for a series of eerie misfortunes and nightmares in his life. Now, the box wound up selling to a college student in Missouri for $180. His name was Josef Nitschke, or just Joseph, and After acquiring the box, he allegedly began to experience the same kind of strange and chilling phenomena. Although Joseph mentioned he started experiencing unexplainable hair loss, he would also get strange smells in his home. He started to have unexplainable car troubles out of nowhere and would have these recurrent nightmares. Joseph got fed up pretty quickly and wound up selling the box to his roommate's boss, a man named Jason Haxton, who was the director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine in Kirksville, Missouri. And like Joseph and Manus before him, Haxton apparently began to become tormented by this box as well. He started coming down with weird health issues, was getting mysterious bruising, and would catch glimpses of shadow figures darting through his home out of the corner of his eyes. And from there, Haxton decided to create a website about this Dybbuk box. And he would list all the claims that this object was cursed and responsible for paranormal happenings. And then in 2004, Haxton sold the rights to this story to a production company in Hollywood. Eventually, Sam Raimi made a film all about it. You know, Sam Raimi, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy, Evil Dead, you know, all those movies. And so he made a film back in 2012 called The Possession, which was all about this Dybbuk box. And now this box resides in Zach Bagans' museum in Las Vegas. Bagans himself has stated that the box has negatively affected him and other people involved with his show Ghost Adventures. And interestingly, Post Malone was also once affected by the box too when he visited the museum. According to the story, it's been said that shortly after he came into contact with the box back in 2018, he started having this string of really bad luck out of nowhere. Like, for example, he has a private jet, and one time after he came into contact with the box, this jet needed to make an emergency landing so that it didn't crash. So that's pretty interesting. Now, this all sounds kind of terrifying, right? Well, as it turns out, in 2021, just a few years ago, Kevin Manus, the originator of the eBay post, the guy who started it all back in 2003, admitted to making the whole thing up. It was a hoax. He was a writer after all, and his intention was to create this modern, interactive, and organic horror story that would take on a life of its own. And it certainly did. Now, when interviewed about it, Jason Haxton revealed that there was a kind of a rivalry between him and Manus, and he accused him at the time of hoaxing the whole thing, although Manus hadn't come forward yet. But Haxton also believed that there may actually be something paranormal happening with this wine box, and that perhaps Manus cursed it himself using Kabbalah. Either way, Haxton decided to capitalize on the story of the box, and he was sure that Manus was annoyed by that because he wasn't getting any kickback. And after an investigator checked out the Dybbuk box at the museum in Las Vegas, he concluded that it wasn't actually this pre-World War II antique from Poland, but instead this minibar was manufactured in New York back in the 1950s. Now, other skeptics and debunkers over the years before this also had pointed out that while the idea of what a Dybbuk was, the name wasn't actually used from the Talmud, and there was no historical basis for the existence of a thing like a Dybbuk box. Although there was a film from 1937 in Poland called The Dybbuk, so the term goes back to at least 100 years ago. Although this particular case turned out to be a hoax, there are many who experience similar types of possessions by malevolent entities. So who's to say there isn't a real object somewhere out there causing these types of issues for people? And now a word from our sponsor.
Break free from the ordinary and check out a podcast with thought-shattering concepts that will reshape the way you interpret the world.
We are the Swerve Podcast, and our mission is very simple. Each episode, we research and discuss topics that swerve off the mainstream path in an attempt to understand everything in the universe, one obscure topic at a time.
Whether you're into forgotten history, cutting-edge science, strange frontiers of the unknown, or just need a good laugh in an uncensored way, the Swerve Podcast has you covered.
Listen to the Swerve Podcast today on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other major platforms.
Now, before we get back to the show, did you know that you can support the Strangeology podcast by becoming a member over on patreon.com/Strangeology for as little as $1 per month? Any support helps out a ton and helps keep the lights on here at Strangeology HQ. You can join higher tiers, which unlocks more perks, such as early access to new episodes that are ad-free, as well as early access to new long-form YouTube videos. You also get access to the members-only episode extension, Strangeology Beyond, which is sometimes a whole other research topic and episode itself, or an extended guest interview. There's also a merch discount from my shop, exclusive merch for members, voting power, bonus content, and so much more. So if you want to join a growing community of like-minded people who are into the strange and unexplained, it's a great place to be. I appreciate the support so much, and the more of it that I get, the more content that I can create for everyone out there who loves this stuff like me. And to those members out there, thank you so much for your continued support. So again, if you want to join this community of fellow lovers of the weird, strange, and unexplained, check it out over on patreon.com/Strangeology. All right, now let's get back to the show. And speaking of haunted objects, old dolls are frequently cited as being haunted or possessed by evil spirits, and none is more well known than Annabelle the doll. You probably know of this object from the Conjuring series and the sequel series made all about it. But interestingly, Annabelle is a real thing, but it isn't this creepy, lifelike porcelain doll that's portrayed in the movies. It's literally just a old Raggedy Ann doll from the 1970s. And that actually might make this story a little bit creepier, because if you are a child of the 70s or the 80s, there's no way that you're unfamiliar with these dolls. Now, this story has inspired a wave of fear and fascination the world over. It's a very popular cursed object. The seemingly innocent Raggedy Ann has this stitched-on smile and a really simple appearance. But this particular one, Annabelle, hides a chilling legacy of terror, along with violent attacks and strange experiences. It's, from what we can tell, no ordinary doll. Now, according to the stories, she has been at the center of a number of disturbing events for a woman and her roommate and some friends. And this doll left this trail of supernatural chaos in its wake. But what is it about Annabelle that has terrified even the most skeptical among us? So the story of Annabelle begins in 1970 when a nursing student named Donna received the doll as a present from her mother for her 28th birthday. At the time, this doll appeared to be nothing more than a large Raggedy Ann, something sweet and harmless. She was thrilled with the doll, and Donna, along with her roommate Angie, initially found nothing strange about it. It sat on a chair in their shared apartment as just a simple decoration piece. But soon, things took a turn for the bizarre and terrifying. The doll seemed to inexplicably move by itself. At first, it did so subtly, shifting its position from one room to another when nobody was around. Sometimes Donna would come home from work to find that Annabelle somehow made her way into her bedroom, and the door would be shut with no explanation as to how she got there. And what started out as curiosity soon turned to dread. The roommates began finding these cryptic messages scrawled in childlike handwriting on scraps of parchment paper saying things like, "Help me," and "Help Lou," despite neither Donna nor Angie keeping parchment paper in their home. And Lou was Angie's boyfriend. So one day, Lou was in the apartment while nobody was home, and he apparently heard this rustling sound coming from Donna's bedroom. He thought that maybe somebody was trying to break in, so he went to go check things out. He didn't find any sign of forced entry in the window or the door, but instead found that Annabelle the doll was laying face down on the floor in Donna's room. And out of nowhere, he suddenly felt this burning pain on his chest. And when he looked down, he could see these bloody claw marks bleeding through his shirt. Obviously, terrified, he went to go clean up and get out of there for the time being, not knowing how that happened or what was going on. And stranger still, these marks seemed to inexplicably vanish completely within 2 days, which is very quick. If you have a cut on you, normally that stuff's on you for at least a week or more. But things didn't end there. Annabelle kept moving around, and as these disturbing events continued to escalate, Donna decided that it was time to seek out help from a medium, hoping to uncover what was happening. Now, when the medium came over, she held a seance, and during this seance, the medium informed Donna and Angie that the spirit of a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins had attached itself to the doll. The girl's spirit was said to have died tragically on the land where their apartment now stood, and claimed that she felt comforted by the presence of Donna and Angie. This medium claimed that the spirit was benevolent and only wanted to be loved and cared for. And believing that the spirit of Annabelle to be innocent and feeling bad for it, Donna and Angie made the grave mistake of giving it permission to stay inside of the doll, and subsequently also permission to stay inside of their apartment. And we all know that's bad news. And although this spirit claimed to be an innocent little girl, it wasn't long before more malevolence started to happen from this entity within the Annabelle doll. Lou continually became a target of the doll's malicious behavior. He had already been attacked once with claw marks on his chest, but soon after he began experiencing terrifying nightmares involving Annabelle. In one dream, she crawled up his chest, pinning him down as he struggled to breathe under her weight. Realizing that they had made a grave error, Donna and Angie decided to reach out to an Episcopal priest named Father Hagen, who contacted his superior, Father Cook, who then reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were famous demonologists and paranormal investigators at the time. Now, the Warrens quickly identified the spirit within Annabelle as not a little girl. According to them, the spirit had manipulated the women into thinking that it was innocent, all while gaining strength and seeking to possess a human host. The Warrens explained that the doll itself wasn't possessed, but rather it acted as a conduit for this demonic entity. The scratches on Lou on his chest were a warning, an indication of what could happen if this entity was left unchecked. The Warrens were quoted on this case saying, "Spirits do not possess inanimate objects like houses or toys, they possess people. An inhuman spirit can attach itself to a place or object, and this is what occurred in the Annabelle case. This spirit manipulated the doll and created the illusion of it being alive in order to get recognition. Truly, the spirit was not looking to stay attached to the doll, it was looking to possess a human host." And the signs they cited to back up their claim of the entity being demonic: teleportation, for example, the doll appearing in one room and then the other, seeming to move on its own, as well as materialization such as the parchment paper notes that seemed to just kind of appear out of thin air, and also the mark of the beast, for example, the claw marks on Lou's chest. The Warrens then ordered an exorcism of the apartment to be performed by Father Cook, and after the investigation, they took Annabelle to their occult museum in Monroe, Connecticut, where she has remained ever since. The doll now sits in this specially made glass case, locked away to prevent further harm. And there's this big sign on the bottom of the case that reads, "Warning, positively do not open." The case is also blessed regularly to ensure that the entity remains confined to the doll and cannot cause harm to anyone else who visits the museum. At least that's the idea. But despite being locked up, Annabelle's legacy continues to haunt those who have come into close contact with her. The first one happening within minutes of removing her from Donna and Angie's apartment. The Warrens buckled up the doll in the backseat of their car, but decided to take the back roads instead of the highway should Annabelle have any kind of potential power to cause a car crash. However, taking the back roads back home to Connecticut proved to be no less potentially treacherous. Evidently, during their ride back, the brakes on the car stalled or outright failed on them several times during the drive, almost causing potentially fatal car crashes. Ed got the idea to pull out his holy water and splashed it all over the Annabelle doll, which apparently resolved the problems with the brakes for the rest of the ride back. And as Annabelle took up a spot in the Warrens Museum, they themselves reported ongoing strange incidents whenever they moved the doll. Lorraine claimed that she saw Annabelle levitate and move on its own multiple times. And despite locking her in their outer office building, they would come home later to find that Annabelle had made her way back into their main house. Ed Warren also recounted that the doll had a strange effect on visitors to their museum as well. One particularly infamous story involved a young man who was mocking the Annabelle doll during a tour of the museum. And according to the Warrens, the man banged on Annabelle's case, laughing at the warnings surrounding it. And on the way home, this man lost control of his motorcycle and crashed into a tree, and he died instantly. His girlfriend, who survived the crash, claimed that they had been laughing about Annabelle just before the incident. And whether or not the crash was a result of the doll's curse, the Warrens believe that mocking Annabelle came with deadly consequences. Now, today, Annabelle remains one of the most well-known haunted objects in the world, with her legacy growing stronger with each retelling of the story, with all of the media surrounding it, the movie series, and whether it's viewed as a genuine paranormal threat or a manifestation of our human fear and fear of the unknown, Annabelle continues to captivate and terrify us. And say what you will about the Warrens, there's a whole episode worth of investigating into them. Some think that they were fraudsters. That's a story that I'll need to look into for another time. But to this day, Annabelle remains locked in her glass case. She waits in the occult museum and reminds us that sometimes the most innocent looking objects could actually have a darkness to them. And the question remains, is Annabelle simply a doll, or is there really something far more sinister lurking within this object? And of course, skeptics brush off the story as superstition. It was a hoax, nothing actually happened. Those who have encountered Annabelle would say otherwise. And now I've got one more cursed object / location for you all before we close out today's episode. And this one takes place in the heart of Louisiana's Bayou country, the Myrtles Plantation, which has long been considered one of the most haunted places in America, if not the world. This place was built in 1796, and it's this historic antebellum mansion in the town of St. Francisville. And this place is steeped in mystery, murder, and ghostly tales, as well as cursed objects. Now, this mansion is a relic from an earlier, more brutal age, scarred by the horrors of slavery, which obviously gives the imagery of human tragedy and suffering. It was a dark time in our history. But among all of the legends surrounding this plantation, one artifact is said to stand out here for its chilling reputation: a mirror that's said to be haunted by the spirits of those who met tragic and untimely ends within its grounds. This is known as the Myrtles Plantation Mirror, and this mirror is believed to house the souls of murdered family members who once inhabited the plantation. And it's believed that they're trapped for eternity within its reflective surface. But how did this ordinary mirror become the vessel for such profound sorrow and paranormal activity? Well, we have to start off with the history of how this property came to be and the tragic tales of the families that inhabited it over the centuries. So the story of the Myrtles Plantation and its mirror and all sorts of other paranormal activity around this place begins when the land that it resides on was purchased by a man named David Bradford, who was a general in the American Revolution in 1796. According to the rumor, the home was built on the site of a Native American burial ground from the Tunica tribe, so already it could be a place of high strangeness and curses. And when the house was finished, Bradford named it originally Laurel Grove. Interestingly, Bradford was involved in the Whiskey Rebellion of 1791 through 1794, which is why he fled to Louisiana in the first place, which at the time was not part of the United States. Bradford was eventually pardoned by President John Adams in 1799, and afterwards, Louisiana became part of the United States after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 anyway. Now, David Bradford lived out the rest of his days at Laurel Grove until 1808. Bradford's widow, Elizabeth, then ran the property until 1817, and then passed it down to her son-in-law, Clark Woodruff, who was a local judge, who had married Elizabeth and David's daughter, Sarah. And they had 3 children together: Cornelia Gale, James, and Mary Octavia. Now, the Woodruff family is one of the most infamous legends attached to the house, which involves a number of their alleged murders. According to local lore, the Woodruff family lived a life of relative comfort, and Clark was said to be mostly a good man, but also not really, because Clark was apparently an adulterer and wound up having an affair with one of the slaves that the Woodruffs owned, a woman by the name of Chloe. This affair was said to have gone on for several years, but as time went on, Chloe feared that Clark's wife, Sarah, would find out, so she began eavesdropping on conversations around the plantation house that she was not supposed to be privy to. Eventually, Chloe was caught, and Clark Woodruff ordered that as punishment, her ear was to be cut off for spying on the family's business and conversations. Afterwards, Chloe would wear this green turban to conceal her disfigurement, all while seething with rage and plotting her revenge on the Woodruffs. As the legend goes, somewhere between 1823 and 1824, Clark was away on business, and that evening, Chloe supposedly baked this cake, and it was supposed to be for Sarah and the children. And it was said that she laced it with poison extracted from boiled and reduced oleander leaves, which are extremely toxic to humans if ingested. Pretty much every part of the oleander flower is poisonous. The stem, the flower, the nectar, the leaves. It's pretty much bad news all around. So Chloe apparently hoped to make the children sick and then planned to miraculously nurse them back to health to regain favor with Clark. However, the plan went terribly wrong, and the poison actually wound up killing Sarah and her 2 daughters before Chloe could do anything to help. And after the deaths of Sarah and the 2 daughters, the legend states that Chloe was hanged by her fellow slaves and her body thrown into the Mississippi River, fearing retribution for her actions. And to this day, witnesses have claimed to see the spirit of a woman wearing a green turban wandering around the plantation grounds, leading many to believe, although unconfirmed, that this is the ghost of Chloe. Others still hear the disembodied sounds of giggling children around the house and property at night, and it's thought that those are the spirits of Cornelia and Mary, the Woodruff daughters. But what about the Myrtles Plantation Mirror? Well, according to age-old superstition, mirrors have long had this reputation for connecting the living and the dead. In some traditions, it is customary to place a sheet over mirrors when a family member dies, because there's this belief that mirrors can trap the souls of the dead. Well, with all of the alleged death in the home, it seems that this practice was not followed to the T, and this one mirror in particular, an ornate parlor mirror, wasn't covered following the death of Sarah and her daughters, and it's believed that their souls became trapped within it, and potentially other spirits as well. Other versions say that Chloe used voodoo to trap their souls before she was hanged, but that's all just rumor. Now, despite this story about Chloe poisoning Sarah and her daughters with this oleander poison-laced cake, the official story when looking at the records is that there was never actually a slave by the name of Chloe that was owned by the Woodruff family. In addition, it was also recorded that Sarah and her 2 daughters actually got yellow fever and succumbed to the illness, as there wasn't really much they could do about it at the time. So the story there seems to have evolved into this idea that there was foul play at hand, when historically, from what we know, that may not have been the case. However, that doesn't mean that the mirror still couldn't harbor the souls of Sarah and her daughters who died a tragic death either way. And over the years, visitors and staff alike have reported unsettling phenomena whenever they approach or stand before the mirror. Handprints, small and child size, frequently appear on the glass, as well as these mysterious drip marks. And even after the mirror has been meticulously cleaned, they still show up. These marks seem to materialize out of nowhere, as if the spirits of the children and Mary are still reaching out from beyond the grave. Several proprietors of the plantation have even replaced the glass of the mirror, and even that hasn't stopped this phenomena from occurring, apparently. But it's not just the handprints that disturb those who encounter this object. There have been countless sightings of ghostly figures within its reflection. Many claim to have seen the apparitions of a woman and children in period clothing from the early to mid 1800s, which is believed, of course, to be Sarah Woodruff and her daughters standing mournfully beside them while they look into the glass. Others have witnessed shadowy figures darting across the room, only to vanish when they turn around. And if you do a quick Google search, there are some interesting images. Of course, things can be photoshopped, but I'll link a few in the show notes. Many have also said that the mirror itself generates an eerie, oppressive atmosphere, and that it sometimes gives off cold drafts of air when there's otherwise no draft going on through the house. People who gaze in for it for too long also have reported feeling a sense of dread as though something unseen is watching them from the other side. And these stories certainly support the superstition that mirrors can hold more than just reflections, that they can potentially act as portals between the world of the living and the dead, trapping the spirits of those who died tragically within its boundaries. And we can't talk about just the Myrtles Plantation Mirror without talking about the whole property and its haunted history as well. So, little bonus session for you all. Now, the Woodruffs weren't the only family afflicted by the plantation and the cursed objects within. In 1834, Clark Woodruff actually sold the property to a man named Ruffin Gray Sterling and his wife, Mary Catherine Cobb. They were this wealthy family who already owned a number of plantations along the Mississippi River, and they purchased Laurel Grove as their primary residence, and it was at this point that it was renamed to the Myrtles after the myrtle trees that dotted the landscape of the property. And it's thought that the Sterlings may have actually had a sense that something weird and paranormal may have been happening there. For example, during the building of the addition to the primary home, which increased the number of the rooms in the house to 22. They basically doubled the size of it. They wound up putting locks on all of the doors that were intentionally installed upside down. And there's this idea that this was done as a way to confuse any wayward spirits trying to gain entry into rooms. The front door was also decorated with this intricate stained glass window featuring a French cross to ward off evil. Now, like the Woodruffs before them, tragedy would also strike the Sterlings as well. In 1854, Ruffin Sterling contracted tuberculosis and ultimately succumbed to the disease and left the property to Mary Cobb. Eventually, she passed the reins of running the property to her son-in-law, William Winter, who had married Ruffin and Mary's daughter, Sarah. And strange enough, history seemed to repeat itself, and the Winters' 3-year-old daughter contracted yellow fever just as the Woodruff children did decades prior. Now, out of desperation, William and Sarah Winter decided to summon this voodoo priestess named Cleo to help save their daughter, Kate. Cleo spent days in Kate's bedroom performing voodoo rituals, but in the end, she was unsuccessful and the Winters' 3-year-old daughter succumbed to the illness in January of 1861. And ever since, visitors to her room at the Myrtles Plantation claim that the apparition of Kate will appear there, where she's seen trying to perform rituals on visitors while they sleep on the same exact bed that she died in over 160 years ago. Other accounts have claimed that the bed itself will levitate off the floor and shake violently, and there are even gouge marks on the wooden floor in the bedroom, suggesting that there could actually be some truth to these claims. Now, after Cleo was unsuccessful in curing their daughter Kate, William was heartbroken, furious, and blamed his daughter's death on Cleo and wound up having her hung as a result. Many theorize that the apparition that people think is Chloe, back from the Woodruff era, is actually this voodoo priestess named Cleo. Now, at this point in the history, we're up pretty close to the Civil War era. Now, this part of the story adds even more alleged death to the plantation. Just before Kate died, the state of Louisiana declared its secession from the Union just at the start of the American Civil War, and over the course of the war, the Myrtles Plantation barely survived. At one point, Union soldiers came in and ransacked the house, and the Winters family fortune was lost. It was taken away, apparently. According to the legends, however, 3 of the Union soldiers were shot and killed within the house during a gun battle, and from time to time, people who visit the plantation claim to sometimes see these slain soldiers that are wandering around the grounds of the property. And there's also said to be this human-sized bloodstain looking mark in a doorway, and that's thought to be from the gun battle and shooting of these soldiers where they died. And apparently this mark could never get clean, no matter what anyone did to try to get rid of it. And interestingly, other caretakers have reported that in that area of the home, when they're taking a broom or a mop in or around that space to clean, they can't physically push it into like the doorway or the corner area where it is. Like there's some kind of invisible force in the way preventing them from cleaning that, which is interesting, although the validity of those claims, I'm not sure if that's just, stories or not, but that'd be super creepy if there's some kind of invisible force or wall preventing you from like pushing something into a space. Could be, who knows? There's a lot of weird stuff at this property. Now, the Myrtles Plantation ultimately did survive the war, but in 1871, we finally have the first documented and verified murder that actually took place there. Any other deaths were attributed to succumbing to different sicknesses and diseases like tuberculosis and yellow fever. There were alleged murders, of course, but none of those were actually recorded or documented beyond hearsay. Now, one night in 1871, this unknown visitor apparently showed up at the Myrtles Plantation while William Winter was outside on the porch. This visitor then pulled a pistol out and shot him and then just disappeared into the night. And it's said that William crawled up the stairs calling out to Sarah, and he wound up making it to the 17th step as Sarah came out, and then William just collapsed and died in her arms from his wound. There wasn't really anything they could do at that point. He just bled out. And to this day, the murder of William Winter has never been solved. Nobody knows who this mystery assailant was or what his motives were. It's possible that William had some enemies for sure, and maybe that's what it was, but no one ever solved the case from what I could find. And with all of the paranormal occurrences at the Myrtles, of course, the ghost of William has been periodically spotted. Those who have witnessed his spirit say that they can hear his footsteps at night around the house, and that his apparition can be seen staggering and crawling up the flight of stairs in the home, always stopping on step number 17, looking for his wife, Sarah. Pretty creepy. Now, after William died, Mary Cobb, the matriarch of the Sterling family, who was still alive, his wife Sarah's mother, wound up running the plantation again for another 10 years until she passed away. And the estate was left in tons of debt, and ultimately any of the remaining heirs of the family, like Sarah, were ultimately forced to sell the home to pay off the family's debts. And in the years since, the property has been divvied up for development for new housing, and in 1970, the original house and land plot was purchased by James and Frances Myers, who restored the home and wound up turning it into a bed and breakfast. And so that's why people can go and stay there now and have their paranormal haunting experiences, maybe, if it happens or not. And it didn't take them long, apparently, for James and Frances and their guests to realize that there truly could be something eerie and strange happening at this historical property. And over the years of all of these paranormal encounters that have been recorded, the Myrtles Plantation is claimed to be one of America's most haunted houses. Now, with all of the strange activity that's happened there, the Myrtles Plantation Mirror remains on display at the plantation, where it continues to draw visitors eager to experience its supernatural presence. Other people want to stay in Kate's room or just see what they can see. And the mirror itself occupies this prominent place in the house, and it's this kind of silent but ever watchful reminder of all of this tragedy that befell the Woodruff family and the Sterling family, anyone else who had all this bad stuff happen to them. And despite the passage of time, the mirror's paranormal activity doesn't really seem to be showing any signs of going away. Again, there's these small childlike handprints that will appear on the glass, strange drips, there's ghostly figures that are seen in the reflection, and this ominous, heavy presence that visitors can feel, as well as this cold wind that seems to emanate from the mirror itself. And the mirror has also become one of the most famous cursed haunted objects in America. And of course, it's been featured on shows like Ghost Hunters, Unsolved Mysteries, etc. And in our age of digital photography and all our modern tech, the strange phenomena that surrounds this thing continues to baffle experts, and the stories of this thing are going to continue to happen. And I'm sure that as time marches forward, more people will continue to experience high strangeness and haunting, chilling paranormal activity from this mirror and the Myrtles Plantation property itself. All right. Thank you again for hanging out with me today and listening to the show. I really hope you enjoyed this episode for this year's Halloween Spooktacular. The world is a truly mysterious place, and I think I'll be trying to avoid any and all cursed objects for the foreseeable future. And there's even more out there, so stay tuned for future stories about additional cursed objects. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone out there who checks out the Strangeology podcast. Those of you who download it, share it with friends and family. It helps me out so much when you do that. The Strangeology podcast really wouldn't be possible without the support of listeners like you. The best way to support the show is to tell your friends and anyone who loves the strange and unexplained. And you can also leave me a review on your favorite podcasting app. A 5-star review would be super duper helpful and really help boost the show to new audiences and more listeners. We're trying to send this thing to the moon, so all of your support and help is super appreciated. To any advertisers or companies out there looking to collaborate with Strangeology, or if you would like to be considered for an interview on the show, or if you have suggestions on episodes, or just have kind things to say, you can email us at info@strangeology.com. Also, if you are a listener out there and you have your own story of an encounter with the paranormal, cryptids, aliens, the strange and unexplained, any and everything, definitely send an email there as well. I'm working on putting together a brand new episode all about listener submitted stories. So get in touch. That's info@strangeology.com. And make sure to give me a follow over on all of my social media accounts. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, X, TikTok, Threads. I'm most active posting short form content over on my Instagram and TikTok. Facebook gets looped in there as well, and so does YouTube. So if you're looking for more from me in short form video content, definitely check that out. I'm also working on adding more to my longer form video content on my YouTube channel, and you can find all the links in the show notes. Also, make sure to check out my website, strangeology.com. I've got a blog there. You can also sign up for my email list to receive updates about Strangeology, get occasional promo codes for my shop or giveaway information. And yeah, definitely check that out. And if you're looking for another way to support Strangeology, you can check out my Etsy shop, which is at strangeology.etsy.com. I've got a whole assortment of cryptid, alien, and Fortean gear available on t-shirts, tank tops, long sleeves, sweatshirts, hoodies. I've also got blankets since winter is coming, and it will be nice to cozy up to some cryptid themed gear. I've also got stickers, magnets, prints, mugs, tumblers, enamel pins, and more. I know I'm forgetting a whole bunch of stuff. And I do have a lot of fun holiday themed designs since the holidays are right around the corner. They're kind of the ugly Christmas sweater variety. And I'm always adding in new designs, so definitely check back often and stay tuned. Again, that's strangeology.etsy.com. I appreciate your support so much. All right, I think that's all from me for now. I'm going to take a quick break here, and when I return for this edition of Strangeology Beyond, the members-only portion of the show, I'm going to be diving into more cursed stories. This one is going to be about the curse of King Tut's tomb. You won't want to miss it. Members, stick with me, and for everyone else, until the next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and keep it strange, and happy Halloween. Welcome back, members, to this edition of Strangeology Beyond, your exclusive portion of the show. Happy to be back for another exclusive research episode.